All right, joining us now on the 800th episode of In the Circle, the man who has made the most appearances in the Circle history by far. Uh, he is now, of course, at D1 softball, in case you have not heard, if you've been under a rock. But he's our good friend Justin McLeod joining us there. Congrats, only fitting you get to be part of this 800th episode.
I mean, you have done a lot of them, but this one feels a little extra special. So now I know why. This is good stuff.
Fourth, yeah,
Yeah, I think
fourth year in a row, you get to share an episode with Amanda Scarborough.
I could certainly do worse for podcast partners or from guest appearance mates here. I could certainly do worse than Amanda.
All right, so we're going to do what we've done the last couple of years. We're going to go through all of the mid-major conferences, and I think it's going to be fascinating with realignment going on. So much focus on the major conferences, Justin, but it does present some interesting domino effects, and certainly in the mid-majors. What to you is the biggest mid-major story of 2024?
To me, I like the realignment, and I do think realignment is high on that list. To me, though, I really mid-major softball reached the level that it reached last year in terms of the postseason. You had five mid-major, or I guess five non-power five at-large bids to the NCAA tournament. That's more of an exception than the rule, but I'm curious how close mid-majors and non-power five teams can come to duplicating that this year. I think that's something that's going to dominate more than maybe it seems like. And then right there with it, the realignment and its effects on even that factor as well.
Let's get into some of the leagues. And let's begin with the American Athletic Conference, who obviously lost UCF, Houston, to the Big 12, but picked up Charlotte, picked up UTSA, picked up UAB. They pretty much picked up a lot of teams from USA, and I think it's brought some intrigue. It's a deeper league now. It's a bigger league in the American. Is the American, even though they lose UCF Houston, perhaps going in as the top mid-major conference in college softball in 2024?
I think it is. And I think actually something that one of the coaches in the American said to me, that league got stronger through realignment. When you send away or you get rid of or you lose, whatever phrasing, two schools to a Power Five conference, normally you would think, okay, well, how are you going to replicate, duplicate, follow that? And all the American did was go get five schools, well, five softball playing schools that truthfully made that conference even stronger, made it deeper, made it the biggest it's been on the softball side. And it is, I believe, a much stronger league now than it was pre-realignment. And that's not common. That is also the exception, not the rule. That's not an everyday thing that with this mass realignment that a league, especially a mid-major league, gets better after losing teams. But the American did. I love the American this year. It's a fun league, a lot of fun teams.
It should still be a multi-bid league moving forward. Obviously, Charlotte made the NCAA tournament last year with Ashley Chastain. They bring back a core of that team. You got North Texas with Rodney DeLong. They were in the regionals a couple seasons ago. You obviously have UAB and their tradition in softball. Florida Atlantic, Jordan Clark in her second year has a lot of transfers, additions there. Give me your thoughts here on the American here. How many, I mean, as far as some of the outlook you're looking for in this from the teams and, what teams are in contention for the conference title and an NCAA bid.
Well, if you look at the American, I think the American has the potential of being a three bid league, to be honest. I think that potential is there. Now, whether that third bid, and when I say third bid, so Wichita State is my pick to win the championship. They're a holdover in the American. Charlotte, I think, is a pretty easy pick at number two, at least in the preseason. Both are defending NCAA tournament teams, etc. And I think going into the season, probably both have a good chance, or seen to have a good chance at the tournament. But I do think the American has a shot at a third bid. I think in North Texas is in a good spot for that. I think the one thing about the American that I think is interesting is you could tell me that one of any six teams, so take out those top two, and you could tell me that one of any probably six teams from the rest of the league got that third bid. Look into your crystal ball. This is what's going to happen, and it wouldn't surprise me. I think the league is that deep. You look at a North Texas. You lost Ashley Peters in the circle, and you had it after last year, and you had a year where that Mean Green offense was not as productive as they could and probably should have been. Rodney DeLong has said that. I think the one thing about North Texas last year was how high the expectations were coming into the year. I mean, you have to think this is a North Texas team coming off a regional final in 22. They got top 25 votes coming into the season. They were the prohibitive conference favorites coming into the season. Everyone expected them to be so good, and I think that pressure got to North Texas a little bit. I do like North Texas this year. Mackenzie Wagner did well in the circle last year. I think Skylar Savage is still a solid choice there, joining with Wagner. I think that offense for North Texas to me is the linchpin for them. You think about Kaylee Gamble. She hit 16 home runs again last year. Still a huge power threat. But across the board, I think North Texas's offensive stats were a little low, but certainly lower than expected. And so I think that's a pretty key thing for them this year. But I could absolutely see North Texas as that third bid. And then I look around at, an FAU, you mentioned, a Florida Atlantic, a lot of transfers in there. I think you're going to see a lot of transfers, a lot of new faces in their starting lineup. That can mean a lot of things, but their potential is significantly higher this year than it was last year, thanks to the talent they brought in and some of the talent that was there. And even, you mentioned Jordan Clark, the head coach. Now it's their second year. That's a difference. That's a different thing than for a rookie head coach. So Florida Atlantic certainly has some really good potential down there. I think of a South Florida. After Georgina Coric, what does South Florida look like? Not great, but they still do have some pieces of the puzzle. And if they can put that puzzle together, we know Ken Erickson knows what he's doing in the sense of the man wins. He wins a lot. Wins a lot historically. So South Florida is one of those teams that can put the puzzle together. I like Tulsa. I am high on Tulsa this year. They've got some offensive weapons back. Haley Morgan, for instance, is one that I really think is underrated even still. Mara Moore in the circle was one that I really liked last year. And one thing for Tulsa that I think is key is for the first time in a few years, they've brought in a dedicated pitching coach. Chrissy Strimple has been the pitching coach. Like, she's done the pitching the last few years. And this offseason with an assistant coaching change, they went out and got a pitching coach. I think that's huge for Tulsa. They have the offensive weapons there. Mara Moore is a solid arm, and now you give her a pitching coach. I think Tulsa could sneak up on some people this year. And then you've got UAB, lost Sierra Frazier, the reigning Conference USA Player of the Year. So what do they look like? They've returned 3 all-conference players, so they're still – the cupboard is not bare. And East Carolina, similar to what I said about FAU, brought in a bunch of transfers that I think you're probably going to see most of in the starting lineup at some point, probably pretty regularly. So it's that whole, what is that, how fast track does that bring ECU's rebuild? So like I say, there's one of any probably 6 teams that outside of Wichita and Charlotte after them, you could tell me that some of these teams finished second and a Wichita or Charlotte fell to third, and even that aspect wouldn't surprise me. I think it's a really, really deep league. There's some good teams, and I think we're going to hear the Americans' name called a lot, maybe with some upset wins and some other things through the course of the year, too.
Conference tournament is in Wichita. Wichita goes in feeling more its strength with the pitchings than the hitting. Obviously, they lose Cindy McKinney, graduates. They do have Addison Barnard back, but they do have some young players there that they're going to have to depend on. They lost some personnel there that really stings for them. That's going to be interesting, and it's going to be interesting to how these teams match up with the extra weeks in the conference. And, I kind of buried the league, but there's been a mid-major team that's made noise in the NCAA tournament now since 2021. 2021 was JMU, got all the way to the World Series. 2022 is UCF was a national seed in the American, won a regional, got to the Supers. Last year, it was San Diego State that won the Los Angeles Regional, beating Liberty, to get to the Super Regionals. Liberty's been knocking on the door. They were in the regional final in Knoxville when they lost to JMU, and they lost to San Diego State. And Doc Richardson told me they're kind of tired of that. So my question to you is, who is that version this year in 2024? Who is that mid-major team that you say, this team could make some noise and break some brackets like we've seen the last 3 years.
I certainly do think that both Wichita State and Charlotte have the potential of filling that role. But like you mentioned, Wichita obviously with some questions on the offense. Charlotte, very similar questions. They lost Cassidy Crouppen and Bailey Benoit after last year. So coming into the year for both teams, what are we going to look like on offense? Probably top of the list. For me, though, I probably go out west a little more. I really am high on Grand Canyon this year. You mentioned that Los Angeles Regional. It was Grand Canyon who upset UCLA in the opening round. Liberty ended up eliminating the Bruins. I think that was a sign of what Grand Canyon is capable of. I really like what Shannon Hayes has done out there. He knows how to win. He's a head coach who knows how to win. He's done a lot of it. He's been around for a while. They've got a really incredibly powerful offense, a deep lineup, and a very, very deep pitching staff that has actual talent on it. It's not just a cluster of arms. So I think Grand Canyon's got a chance to maybe be that team that makes a little noise. They made a little noise last year. Couldn't quite finish the job to get to the regional final or anything like that. But I think they have a shot at that this year. I think that's a really strong club that Shannon Hayes has got himself there in Phoenix.
Yeah, they're really good. Maribeth Gorsuch's done a good job with that pitching staff. One more thing on the American, I'll go back to it before we move on, because we are going to hit up and try to hit up all 27 conferences, non-power 5, if you will. By the way, this will be the last time we get to say that, because next year will be a completely different number of variables. Who's the best pitcher in the American going in? And I say that because remember last year, Justin, we said the American was going to come down to which pitcher steps up and becomes the best pitcher in the league because Georgina Corrick had graduated. We felt that it was a wide open race and whoever pitcher stepped up maybe wins the trophy. Well, it turns out it was Sarah Willis who ended up winning the pitcher of the year, and UCF won the conference tournament against Tulsa. People forget Tulsa was in that championship game. So to back up your point about Tulsa, perhaps it sounds like maybe they think they can carry that momentum over to this year. But who is the best pitcher in the American going into the year?
To me, I think it's probably Sam Gress at Charlotte. I'll give Gabby Sacco from Florida Atlantic, the Conference USA Pitcher of the Year last year, over Gress, her flowers as well. But to me, it's Gress or Sacco. I would probably lean a little bit to Gress. The biggest thing for me was Gress's endurance for Charlotte. She threw a lot. She threw against some tough teams. She took her lumps, but she was effective when she needed to be. She was what Charlotte needed her to be. Charlotte hasn't necessarily had an overpowering ace, and I'm not sure Gress is that, but she's got some of that in her. So to me, coming into the year, Sacco has that pitcher of the year title to defend, even in a new conference. But to me, I think Gress probably edged her out for me as the best pitcher coming into the season. Just on maybe not awards, but based on just what I saw from Gress last year.
All right, of course, Grand Canyon is in the WAC conference. They're the defending champions there. Coach Hayes, give me your quick thought on the WAC. You mentioned obviously you like Grand Canyon a lot. Is there anybody that can even make them sweat in the WAC there? What's your quick thought on there in the WAC, or do you think Grand Canyon kind of breezes there?
I think they will breeze to a fair extent, but I do think there are some who can pull off an upset win, make it a little more interesting. You know, you think of a Utah Tech in 2023, they won the regular season, lost a lot of talent after the year, both to graduation and to transfer. But, you know, I think Utah Tech still got some offensive pieces. I look at a Seattle that's kind of always in that upper heap in the WAC. So I think there are a couple of clubs, you know, a Tarleton, a Cal Baptist that have kind of challenged a little bit as well. So I think for me, I do think Grand Canyon wins the conference. I do think Grand Canyon, you know, shows what a team they are. But I think there are a couple who maybe can make it a little more interesting, maybe do a little something in conference themselves, maybe have a shot at pulling off an upset win, maybe upset series win somewhere in there, depending on how the cards fall.
Can Grand Canyon get to be a 3 seed? Is that a realistic goal for them to be a 3? Kind of like we've seen with Boston in recent memory, for example. There was a year where Villanova was a 3. I know they have a challenging schedule, non-conference. I know the WAC has some, you know, it's kind of been in the lower teens, maybe in the 20s, sometimes in the RPI rankings. Is a 3 seed realistic for Grand Canyon?
I do think it's realistic. I'm not necessarily saying it'll happen, and because the biggest thing that I need to see, if Grand Canyon's going to get a 3 seed, I need him to pull off some wins early in non-conference play. They do benefit from being in Arizona. You have a lot of teams that will come to Arizona in the early weeks of the season to play, so you're going to have a shot at some of those wins and some wins that will age well. But you need some wins there. You can't just play those teams. I need to see you pull off some upsets, maybe pull off some tight games. Games against even lower Power Five teams who will finish lower in their conferences will still matter. And I think Grand Canyon can do that. If they do that, yes, I think a 3 seed is completely reasonable. And the Boston example you used is excellent. I think both Grand Canyon and Boston University play in conferences that are not necessarily super strong. Probably your RPI suffers throughout conference play because you're playing 3-game series against the rest of the league. But I do think Grand Canyon, their non-conference slate gives them some opportunities for some wins that will age well, that will matter. If they can pull off those wins, I do think a 3 seed is completely reasonable for Grand Canyon.
Well, speaking of Boston, let's go to the Patriot League. The Boston Lehigh has dominated that conference the last few years and represented the league. Do you see that being the case? And what's your thoughts on Ashley Waters' Boston team in 2024 version?
I do still think it'll come down to Boston and Lehigh. I think that's probably the recipe for still a little while yet. And some of those matchups between those two teams have been battle royales. Like they've been such good matchups year over year. The thing about Boston for me, they return so much. They return Kayla Ronson. They return Allison Boaz. They return Casey Ricard. Like they bring back so many weapons that have some of which have been there for a few years now. Ricard's a sophomore. She hasn't been there for a few years now. Um, that's the thing about Boston for me. They have this innate ability to reload that roster every 2, 3, 4 years, but they do it in such a way that you have an Allison Boaz and a Casey Ricard there at the same time. That you still have a Kayla Ronson to anchor the lineup when you've got pitcher, great pitching still there. Like they do a really nice job with the talent turnover and some of them still being able to share, like still being there at the same time to maximize their potential. I really like that Boston club this year. They won a lot of games last year, got appropriate recognition for it. Like people paid attention when Boston was winning games last year. And I think they're going to do a good chunk of winning more this year. I really am high on that Boston club as well.
Do you think this is her best team that she's had there?
I don't know if it's her best team, but I think do well and it pays off for them consistency. So I think that's something that's there for them this year is having those pieces back. I think that's a big deal.
And I think too, another tournament run, if they make it to the tournament and get some wins there, Ashley Waters' name, I gotta believe, will be a hot name in the coaching carousel off season, right? When jobs open up. I gotta think that's every year there's that 1 or 2 names that pops up, gets floated out there. Look at Ashley Chastain last year. Her name was rumored for every job. She ended up staying at Charlotte, but I kind of feel like Waters could be one of those candidates this year in 2024 that becomes a hot name for some of the other jobs with the success she's had there at Boston.
I think the thing about Ashley Waters, her name's been on the carousel a couple of times before. It's been on there a few times before, and she's chosen to stay at Boston, to stay at BU. And I think she's reaped the rewards of that. I mean, she still is reaping the rewards of that. You're seeing that consistency on her part pay off through consistency with the team, consistency with the winning, things like that. So that's one thing that's interesting about Ashley Waters. She's been a hot commodity more than once before, and she's chosen to stay and keep going what she has going at BU. And I think that's something that should not be overlooked in this day and age, especially. Because when you look at how good Boston is, you have to attribute that to Ashley Waters and to what she's built and has willingly chosen to continue building.
Of course, Boston's hoping to have the success kind of like Louisiana did last year. As we go to the Sun Belt, it was the Cajuns finally breaking through with Jerry Glasgow winning the Baton Rouge Regional before losing to Washington in the Super Regionals. It was part of a two-bid league for the Sun Belt last year. They had a third team in South Alabama be one of the first four out. Talking to Amanda Scarborough, she still likes the Cajuns, thinks that maybe the fact they've gotten over the hurdle now and won a regional makes them more dangerous to perhaps get to Oklahoma City as far as a, quote, non-Power 5. Do you buy that?
They've certainly got that potential. I like the makeup of Jerry Glasgow's group on the offensive side. You look at Maya Davis, the center fielder. She have acrobatic catches and a lot of getting on base. Preseason player of the year as selected by the coaches in the Sun Belt. But I look at like a Lauren Allred, who really was a breakout standout at the plate last year. Somebody that Jerry Glasgow didn't even start early in the year. And when I talked to him the preseason this year, he said, if I'd known she was going to do what she was going to do, I'd have started her from day one. I like the transfer group that the Cajuns have this year offensively. I think of a Brooke Ellisted, who probably will slot in at shortstop, a Sam Rowe, who will slot in at third. So I like some of the additions and where they fit into the picture for the Cajuns. For me, the answer to that question is going to come down to the circle. If you think about the Cajuns pitching staff last year, you really had four arms: Carly Heath, Sam Landry, Kendra Lamb, and Megan Shorman. Well, three of those four arms, everybody except Landry, graduated. So this year you've got Lexi Delbury in on a transfer, Sam Ryan in on a transfer from a junior college, and Denali Lecker in on a transfer from Iowa. Landry's still there. The key for UL is those four pitchers need to be able to replicate what the four pitchers did last year. So if Landry is still Landry, somebody needs to step into the shoes of a Carly Heath and be able to come in and be steady Eddie. Somebody needs to step into the shoes of a Megan Shorman, come in the high pressure moments. Somebody needs to step into the Kendra Lamb and just be able to start games and be a workhorse at times. If those pitchers can do that, I absolutely think the Cajuns have a shot. If those pitchers struggle in those arenas, though, it's going to be more difficult for the Cajuns to even replicate that regional win from last year, because if you're going to struggle in the circle, Sam Landry can't do it all. She's a really solid pitcher, underrated at this point still, but she can't do it all. I need those transfers to step up if the Cajuns are going to do something. And the thing is, the proof's going to be in the pudding there. Can Lexi Delbury stay healthy? Can she do at UL what she did at Florida at times? What she showed signs of the brilliance she showed signs of at Florida at times? Can Denali Lecker, who's been in the Big Ten, how is she going to do against Sunbelt offenses? Sam Ryan, JUCO to D1. If those answers are all positive, Cajuns could be a really unstoppable force. But that's an if.
And of course, they'll be challenged with Texas State, who brings back that core from last year's team with Vanderford on the offensive end, Jessica Mullins. There, Olivia Lackey, who is actually the reigning Sun Belt pitcher of the year at South Alabama. Two-part question for you. If I gave you the choice for Sun Belt pitcher of the year, and it's either Jessica Mullins or Olivia Lackey versus the field in the Sun Belt, who do you take?
I'm probably going Mullins. And that's not a shot at Lackey, but it is tough to duplicate or to go back to back in awards like that sometimes. And I think Mullins is a really, really solid arm. So I would probably go Mullins in that one.
Do you have Mullins as the best mid-major pitcher in the country?
Yes. Easy answer.
Is Lackey close?
She is. And touting Jessica Mullins is not me taking a shot at Olivia.
No, I don't think so at all, yeah.
But I do think Mullins is the best arm. I think she shows up really well against any opponent. But yes, Lackey would be in that conversation. If you asked me to give you a handful, Lackey would be one of the handful.
It'll be interesting there with Landry. Of course, Texas State will be the host for the Sun Belt tournament this year. Elsewhere in the Sun Belt, Morgan Zirkles, the new head coach at Marshall, back at her alma mater. Very much a new team there with a new staff. JMU, Lauren Laporte. What do we, do they kind of take a step back up there? I think she likes some of the pieces she's got there in the circle. What's your thoughts on the rest of the Sun Belt?
I do think JMU will take a step back up. They've kind of retooled that team a little bit, retooled the pitching staff a little bit, got a couple of arms in Kirsten Fleet, the freshman, is one that I really am curious to see what she's going to bring to the
Yes,
table.
yes.
I do
Could
think
be a
Jay
freshman. It could be a freshman of the year candidate if things go well for them in the Sun Belt.
very well could be. Um, so I think she's got some real promise. I think that'll pay off well for JMU. I think the thing that impressed me the most about Zirkle at Marshall, and she mentioned this to me when she and I did our preseason chat, she came in and basically wiped out the schedule that she walked into and booked harder competition for her club. And that's not something you see every first year head coach do. Normally you think, okay, well, they're going to pad the win total, go in, see what they've got, especially for a club like Marshall that lost the talent they did at graduation in the portal. But I like that for Zirkle. So I think we are going to see what Marshall's made of, good, bad, or ugly, in the non-conference play. But I do think it'll prepare them better than just padding the win total kind of schedule would. And then I look at Troy. I mean, let's not forget Troy finished third in the conference last year. And the biggest thing for me with Troy is how do you replace Leanna Johnson? I think it's probably the question that's going to dominate across the board. Um, but and I don't know the easy answer to it. I'm not sure there is an easy answer to it. I'm not sure there's an answer to it at all. But if Troy can do that, they do have some pieces returning on offense. They've been in the tournament, recently, a couple of years ago. And, it's not if they can duplicate the success Leanna Johnson had, not in the sense somebody's going to replace Johnson, but if they can still have those wins and that productivity in the circle somehow, we could be talking about Troy as a contending team too. It's just that's a big question that's going to hang over them until they answer it.
Who's the biggest threat to Louisiana in the league? Is it Texas State, especially hosting the conference tournament? Is it South Alabama? Who's the biggest threat?
Texas State. I mean, again, if I'm going to say Mullins is the best pitcher, that's a big difference maker. And Texas State made an NCAA tournament appearance last year as an at-large and returns pretty much every piece of that team. I don't think that should be understated. Like, that's a big deal for a club like Texas State.
Let's go over out west to the Mountain West. That's where San Diego State, the defending conference tournament champions, they won the automatic bid at home, won the Los Angeles Regional, got within a game of the World Series before losing to Utah in the Super Regional. Stacey Newman returns a good core of that back, including Allie Light in the circle. Mac Barbara, offensively, they added Michaela Macario in the infield coming over from UCF. Is San Diego State the overwhelming favorite, or can Justin Schultz and Boise State, who won the regular season title, challenge them? They are the host for the conference tournament this year in Boise.
San Diego State is rightfully the favorite. I don't think I would go so far as to call them the overwhelming favorite. I do think that Boise State team has the talent level, and as the regular season champions last year, I think they're close enough that I don't think I would call SDSU the overwhelming favorite. What I will say is when those two play each other this year, there should be a lot of eyeballs on that series. And I'm not even saying it's a two-horse race, but I think the two horses at the top of the list are probably the biggest horses in the corral, so to speak. That's a really mixed metaphor there. But I do think San Diego State and Boise State are the two best teams by whatever margin. So I would call San Diego State definitely the favorite, but probably not the overwhelming favorite. I think that battle with Boise could be really interesting.
What a reference on the 800th episode. That's why we bring you in appearances. Boise State lost some personnel offensive. How do they make up that ground that you're talking about? Because you sound like you feel that Justin can make that ground up. I've talked to him. Obviously, they've got some players that are going to need to step up, especially in the circle. They're going to need some players to step up there. Jenna Bloom, a transfer out of Arkansas, is certainly one they're counting on. Can they make up that ground on San Diego State? Or is it a case of San Diego State maybe having a hangover?
I think it's both. I truly think it's both, and I think the potential for both is there. I don't think the making up for the offense is going to be as difficult. I mean, Justin Schultz, we know what he's like as a hitting coach. And so I think the offense will come. May not come right away to start the season, but I do think it'll come. The biggest thing for me with Boise is the pitching. If your offense can give you 5 runs a game, which should be pretty attainable for a Boise team, they need to be a little more consistent than last year, but they do have that capability in them. If they can give you 5 runs a game, your pitching's got to be able to hold some teams under 5 runs. And to me, if Jenna Bloom can't be a quality 1B or number 2 option to Taylor Caudle, Boise is sitting pretty. That's super key for them. I think I need to see Jenna Bloom deliver on her potential. Taylor Caudle, we know she's really solid. But for me, it's less the offense and more the pitching that's key for Boise, because I do think that offense will come. And for San Diego State, could there be a little backsliding? Sure, there could. Like that, you're coming off a super regional berth, you're coming off a regional win. Yes, there absolutely could be some backsliding there. I'm not saying they're going to, and I'm not saying they're going to be a bad team by any means. They're not. But they certainly may not be to the level they were last year. You mentioned the word hangover. I think that's a pretty good, pretty apt description of it. When you've made a postseason run like that, and not only you were one win from the Women's College World Series as the road team in a super regional against a Pac-12 team. Like, that's nothing to sniff at. So I think there could be a little backsliding that goes on there. I do still think San Diego State's the team to beat. But like I said, I think that battle at the top could be really, really interesting when it comes down to it.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. Mountain West Tournament in Boise, Idaho this season. Let's talk Conference USA, a major facelift to that league. Liberty now in their first year is the overwhelming favorite. I guess a two-part question. What do you feel is the future of Conference USA? I think there's been some, nerves perhaps at times about what the future of the league would look like. A lot of new members, a lot of movement back and forth. What do you make of Conference USA moving forward? And is there anybody that could push Liberty in that league?
So part one, I think it's a better softball league than people give it credit for. You have to think, yes, Charlotte, North Texas both left, moved to the American. Last season, who was the conference champion that represented the NCAA tournament? It was Middle Tennessee. Guess what? They're still there. A couple of years ago, when CUSA still had divisions in softball, who were the division champs? Western Kentucky, still there. Louisiana Tech, who also won the regular season title outright, still there. So it's easy to say because Charlotte and North Texas left and so many good teams left that it's not good. I don't think that's the case. I think it's an underrated softball league now because of that. You add a Liberty that has been strong for so long. And I think one thing about Liberty that a lot of people miss, it's pretty easy. It's really easy to say this one player did XYZ. This one player did ABC, and to attribute that to the player. Nothing wrong with that. But at a certain point, I think you have to give credence to the system that these players are coming out of. Whether or not those players are able to duplicate it elsewhere, who knows? But I think you've got to give some credence to the system that Dot Richardson runs there at Liberty. You look at some of the wins Liberty has pulled off. You look at some of the games maybe they didn't win, but they were really tied in. Is it an individual? Is it the system? Sometimes I think you've got to give credit to the system. And that's why I think Liberty is such an overwhelming favorite going into this year, even with a couple of major transfers out, because Liberty's system wins. So I actually think Conference USA is a good softball league. I don't think Liberty is just a surefire bet. I think they're the overwhelming favorite. I don't think they're a surefire put your money here because it's absolutely going to happen.
Who pushes them? Who pushes them?
I think Western Kentucky. I think Louisiana Tech both have shots at it. Middle Tennessee lost their ace, so I think their offense is worthy of it. I'm not sure what their pitching is going to look like. But I think a Western Kentucky and Louisiana Tech are both pretty solid squads that could make a run. They've been there. They've played for championships. Western Kentucky was first team out a couple of years ago. I think either one of those teams could take a shot at Liberty.
Liberty obviously got to replace Carly Keeney, got to replace their catcher, who's a big bat in the middle lineup. They do get some healthy players. Dot's excited about the depth that they have. We'll see how they plays out. Of course, Liberty comes from the A-Sun. Big loss for them. Central Arkansas was the darling last year. They won the league, but yet it feels a little strange with the league. There's been some back and forth going on with the A-Sun. Some personnel have left. What do you make of this A-Sun? It feels like a wide open conference right now where there's not a clear cut favorite that people say, hey, we feel good. I mean, the obvious answer is Central Arkansas is the preseason favorite, but they lost their top two arms, and you wonder how Jenny Parsons replaces that. What do you make of the A-Sun?
I think that's a pretty apt description of the A-Sun. I don't think there's an overwhelming favorite. Central Arkansas, as good and as great as they were last year, obviously not the ending they wanted, not being able to make the regional final in a winnable regional at that. But, you lose both arms. Jordan Johnson graduates, Caleb Beaver ultimately just kind of stays in Tuscaloosa, where they played the regional, now at Alabama. So you lose those two arms that were such major pieces of what Central Arkansas did last year. I think the A-Sun's wide open. One thing that I love about the A-Sun, I think some of your best talent in this league is on teams that you don't think of when you think of the A-Sun. If you think of the A-Sun, yes, I understand. Some people still think Liberty. They're not there anymore. They don't count. Outside of that, when you think of the A-Sun, you think of a Central Arkansas. Maybe you think of a Kennesaw for one more year before they leave too. You don't think necessarily of Stetson. To me, Stetson has the best 1-2 punch in that league, and one of the best 1-2 pitching punches anywhere. Lauren Hobbs, Hannah Marion. Two really effective, even-keeled, steady Eddie hurlers. But it's at Stetson, which is not a team that you necessarily think of as a championship favorite. Autumn Courtney at Queens, preseason player of the year in the coaches poll. Really solid arm, pitcher of the year, preseason pitcher of the year. Really solid arm, but at Queens that's still moving up from Division II. Some of the best talent in this conference is at teams that you don't usually see at the top of the list. And I think that's one thing that makes the A-Sun so interesting this year. There's a lot of times where you might hear somebody say, or we might even say on these previews in years past, oh, anybody can win this league, or it's a wide open league. In the A-Sun, I think that's really true, because I think there's these teams that you expect to be at the top, some of whom probably will be. But then there's these teams that I think you expect to be in the middle, maybe even at the bottom, who they have the talent that maybe matches or overpasses in some ways talent of those teams at the top. I really do think it's a wide open league this year. If you tried to pin me to the wall to pick a conference champion, I don't know. Like Central Arkansas is the favorite, so it's theirs to lose until they lose it. But there's some other teams that I really think can make some noise.
And their conference tournament is going to be on a neutral site. I believe they're in the Alabama area, right? That new
Chakalaka Park in Oxford.
Yeah.
That was Chakalaka Park, if you missed it. Chakalaka Park.
Very good. Good job by you on that. I'm interested to see what Jeff Conrad, North Florida, does in his second year. Yep. Maybe bring some offense. North Alabama. Coach Cozart there. Remember, they made the run in the A-Sun. They were one win away from the NCAA tournament and stealing a bid. They got doubled up on that Saturday night by Central Arkansas. So watch those two in mind. And I think it's going to be a wacky A-Sun. I'm perplexed how you mentioned. I agree with you about the Stetson 1-2 punch. I've seen them in person. Don't really understand how they were not on the preseason all-conference teams by the coaches. What's up with that? But
well, I think there's something to be said for kind of sneaking under the radar sometimes.
Yeah, I don't think Shelly Cousins minds that too much.
I think it's probably true.
On that here. That's Justin McLeod, D1 Softball. We're breaking down all 27 mid-major conferences here on In the Circle, the 800th episode on the podcast feed. And, of course, some of you watching on the YouTube channel as well. Let's move forward. We talk about, to me, an interesting league, the Big West, which was a two-bid league last year with Long Beach State coming from behind to win the bid, beating Fullerton at the end of the season. But Fullerton gets the at-large bid. They were the last team announced. I'll never forget that. I think we're all perplexed that they were sent to Clemson, which there's a lot of theories I have about that. But nonetheless, maybe if North Alabama wins, that would have been Fullerton's spot. Whatever, we'll never know. What do you make of the Big West? They're going to have, they're moving forward eventually with a conference tournament. Can they duplicate being a multi-bid league? Certainly that Fullerton-Long Beach State rivalry is at the center of that league. But then you've got year two of Joe Evans with Santa Barbara. They were in the mix in the race for a while. You have obviously Charlotte Morgan and CSUN and the improvements that she has quietly done there at CSUN. What do you make of the Big West?
I think the Big West, I hate to be stereotypical, but I think they're a stereotypical Big West this year. I think that ultimately the conference race probably comes down to Fullerton and Long Beach. Um, I will say this about the Big West. I don't think a team other than Cal State Fullerton gets close to an at-large bid out of that league. Just because of the schedule that Fullerton plays and some of the wins they tend to pull off every year. But that said, you have a UC Santa Barbara that made drastic improvements in year one under Joe Evans, was tied for the conference lead early in conference play, which would have been unthinkable, pre Joe Evans. You have a CSUN, like you mentioned. You have a UC Davis that are kind of always right in that mid pack. And I kind of describe them as teams that you don't want to face. Not because necessarily they've beaten a Tennessee or beaten a Pac team like sometimes your Cal State Fullertons do, seemingly every year or 2 years. But just those teams that when you go in there and play in a weekend, play a doubleheader, you don't want to play them. Might lose one, might lose two. I think CSUN and Davis are both in that category. And then even if you look at like a UC Riverside last year, pulled off some wins that on paper they had no business winning. That's what I like about the mid pack in the Big West is you've got 3 or 4 of those teams. Santa Barbara, I think, has kind of joined that pack now. You really got 3 or 4 of those teams that fit that bill. I don't want to play them. I don't want to play a weekend series at their place. I don't want them coming into my place on Friday and Saturday or on Saturday and Sunday. And that's what I think makes the Big West fun. And that's why I think we pay so much attention to the Big West is because, yes, you know what? Most years, does it seem like it comes down to Fullerton or Long Beach? Sure. But what I think a lot of people don't pay attention to is the fact that even as it comes down maybe to those two teams and their series at the end of the year, well, Fullerton was up here and they lost a game to CSUN. Long Beach was over here, lost the series to, Davis. Like there's always that mid pack that makes their noise, sometimes challenging for that upper tier. That's what I think makes the Big West so much fun.
We are going to the conference tournament. Is it next year, right? Next year,
25.
whenever? So
Yes.
this will be the last year that they go with the regular season automatic bid on there. Give me a name of a player in the Big West to keep in mind.
Megan Duggadillo, hurt last year, the speedster at Fullerton.
Yeah.
Honestly, had she not been hurt last year, she would have been in the top 100, the D100 player rank. She's a really solid kid, difference maker for Fullerton.
Let's move on to the Big East. Connecticut's the defending regular season champions. They've won the last 2 regular season championships under Laura Valentino, but they've not won the automatic bid. Seton Hall won the bid last year. Villanova's in year 2 post-Paige Rao era with obviously Bridget Orchard, their coaching. And then, of course, you got year 2 of Krista Wood at Creighton. Your thoughts on the Big East this year?
I think it looks a little different than what I think we saw a couple of years ago in the Paige Rao years at Villanova. Villanova has established themselves a team you don't ever count out. It's interesting to me that UConn has not been able to finish in the conference tournament the last couple of years. It's not even something I would have expected necessarily. There are a couple of mid-major teams in different conferences that kind of have fit that bill. There's no real reason. Like, there's no attributable reason to why UConn hasn't been able to finish in the tournament. I mean, they've been a really solid club for a few years running now. I think UConn has to be the favorite, just based on that track record, talent they've got coming back. I don't think you can count out Seton Hall. Shelby Smith transferred out as she was in the portal before the season, a grad transfer, ends up at Houston. But I think of Kelsey Carr, for instance, still there at Seton Hall. Big piece of that team that got to the postseason last year. I think Seton Hall is still a club in the race. Like I mentioned, you got a Villanova that you really never can count out. You've got a DePaul team that just a couple of years ago was in that race for that top seed. You've got a Creighton team you mentioned under Krista Woods still kind of building, and you've got a Butler squad sitting there that seems like they always finish 3rd or 4th somehow, just kind of come out of nowhere. Maybe don't have any major studs, but they just win games. And I know I'm missing a couple too. But it's one of those leagues this year to me. I could give you reasons that 4 different teams, for instance, win the league. You tell me, okay, this person's going to win. Why is it? And I could tell you it's X, Y, Z. Like, I do think that's one thing about the Big East is they've strengthened as a softball league. I'm going to use the word parity again. Already used a couple times. I'll use it again. I do think they have that parity though. But for UConn's sake, I hope they can finish in the postseason at some point because when you have a great regular season, you want to be able to experience the NCAA tournament.
And I feel like if they break through and make the NCAA tournament, Laura Valentino could be like Ashley Chastain, who, again, name picks up in the offseason in the carousel there. You mentioned Shelby, obviously, Facine Hall last year, transferred to Houston now. Paige Rao. Who's that player in the Big? It seems like whoever gets that type of player in that post-conference tournament gets that automatic bid. Who is that player, you think, this year in 2024 in the Big East?
Honestly, that's a great question. I think there's a room for emergence. You don't have an automatic Paige Rao that okay, well, going into the year, okay, this is the overwhelming. She's going to be player of the year. Like you don't have that. I think you got some contenders on a few different teams. Like I mentioned, a Kelsey Carr from a Seton Hall. If Seton Hall is able to do in the regular season what they did in the postseason last year, could be looking at her. UConn usually turns out 2 or 3 kids that fit that bill. But I don't think going into the year, I don't think you have that automatic, obvious. This is our stud as a conference, which I think leaves room for emergence from anybody at this point.
Should be wide open. Should be a fun league there, always up
Yeah.
for grabs. Another fun league, the Summit League,
Yeah.
which has been fascinating because you had Omaha winning there. They got one of the better pitchers that people may not be aware of. You got South Dakota State, who right there is in the mix with Coach McSweeney there. You've got North Dakota State always there with Coach Mueller and company. What do you make of the Summit League this year?
Love the Summit League this year. Absolutely love the Summit League this year. I think for me, I'm gonna talk about 2 teams predominantly. It's Omaha and South Dakota State. It's not a slight at North Dakota State. They were the perennial favorites for so long. Still a team in the race in the hunt every year. But I think for me this year it comes down to 2 teams. Omaha and Cameron Meyer made that NCAA tournament appearance, won a game in the regional. Not an easy thing to do necessarily. Cameron Meyer is just insane in the circle. She's so sturdy. She eats up the innings, collects all the strikeouts. Huge piece for Omaha. Could be a piece that has almost been of some upset wins for Omaha this year. That's a club that's really climbed really quickly under Mike Hurd. I think they come into the year really solid. But then South Dakota State too. They are interesting to me on a couple of levels. I think South Dakota State is in position to be this year's Central Arkansas potentially. If you look at South Dakota State's schedule, it's a who's who of Power 5 and NCAA tournament teams. They play Duke in like a 3-game series. They play a doubleheader at Oklahoma State. They play a doubleheader at Florida State. And those are just the ones that come to my mind at the top of my head. They play North Texas in there. So they have such a wide variety, a wide berth of opponents, a ton of them in non-conference play. They even play Wisconsin and Minnesota like on their bye week in the Summit. Like it's an insane schedule non-conference wise. They're gonna run into some wins just by virtue of playing that many teams and still being a talented club. They're going to run into some wins. If they run into the right wins, if they pull off some of the right upset wins, I really think South Dakota State could be could be at this year's Central Arkansas and could look at making the Summit League a multi-bid league potentially if Omaha is as good as I think they could be. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think the potential for that possibility is at least there based on what South Dakota State's challenging themselves with.
Meyer or Kanish? Who you got for a Summit Pitch of the Year?
Can I have them both? Can they be
Oh,
co-pitchers of the
share.
year?
Okay.
No, I think those are. You asked me earlier about Jessica Mullins, best pitcher in the mid majors. Kanish and Meyer are right there in that same race. Kanish has been the heralded one. She's shared a staff. She's done so well. Meyer has really come on in the last couple of years notoriety wise. She's also been steady. I'd take either one of them any day of the week.
Let's talk about the West Coast Conference, and I think it's more an interesting league, not necessarily on the field. It's a small league, no BYU. Loyola Marymount, the heavy favorite. probably Santa Clara, the only team that can maybe make it interesting with Coach Carbonado
Sure.
there. But I think the bigger question, Justin, is what is the future of the West Coast Conference? They have to get to a certain number. They're going to add Oregon State for at least a couple years after this year. Give me your thoughts here on the direction of the West Coast Conference, adding Oregon State, and can it survive all of this constant movement with realignment? Because it's not like Oregon State's a permanent solution. Who knows? I mean, Oregon State, they're kind of spreading their sports all over the place, which which we've discussed at lengthium with about the all the realignment stuff. But what do you make of the West Coast Conference here?
They're in a really interesting place. They were in an interesting place before BYU's exit just because of their size. 6 teams, you were on that cusp of, anything happens, you're gone. And for having the good non-football schools, for having great basketball schools, for having good baseball schools, the softball offering in the West Coast Conference leaves something to be desired. There's the Pepperdines and the Gonzagas of the world. Not having softball still peeves me to this day, but that's another side of the point. Adding Oregon State makes the West Coast Conference better, at least for the next 2 years. Oregon State, Loyola Marymount probably automatically becomes the battle royale in that conference. That's fine. Like, if you've got 2 teams at the top, like what BYU, Loyola Marymount has been the last few years, that's fine. At least you've got a couple of teams who can make some noise. But long-term wise, I think they're in a little bit of a predicament. If Oregon State, if the Pac-2 becomes the Pac XYZ again, if Oregon State and Wazoo come up with a way to keep the Pac-12 together, whatever that looks like, and Oregon State is no longer part of the West Coast Conference, it's a really interesting state of affairs for the WCC. You got 5 teams. It's below the number you're allowed to have to get an automatic bid in. How do you do that? Like, operationally, I'm not sure how you do that. I'm not sure how you survive. We're not going to see programs necessarily fold, at least not for that reason. In the state of college athletics these days, I don't ever say never. But how they manage that, what they do with that, Oregon State coming in is a lifesaver right now. Like, Oregon State is an affiliate member in softball is a lifesaver for the WCC right now. And they will battle with Loyola Marymount for a conference championship. They will. Outside of that, though, I'm not thrilled with where the WCC is, and I can't imagine they are either. It is a predicament, and it's a predicament without an easy answer.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Stu Jackson, former NBA coach and has been involved in the NBA, is now involved with the West Coast Conference. He's been on the West Coast Conference has got a good TV deal with their basketball, and the reason I bring that up is I think a lot of this might be determined of what happens with Gonzaga. They're trying to keep Gonzaga happy there for basketball. I think that's part of the reason why they've added Oregon State and they've added Washington State for basketball. But there's been rumors of Gonzaga maybe going to the Big 12 for basketball, other leagues being interested. That might have a rippling effect on things where if Gonzaga leaves, boy, that could start a ball of wax. And you do wonder if the West Coast Conference gets aggressive and goes after some other members from other conferences. We're not going to spend too much time on that because Lord knows that's what the off season's for. But I will say, talking to Laura Berg, she likes the fact that they're going to be in a geography-friendly league versus, hey, I got to go all the way to the East Coast to play my games. And it might be an easier path for Oregon State to the NCAA tournament because you're in the gauntlet of the Pac-12, whereas now the West Coast Conference, at least on paper, it should be you and Loyola Marymount and a battle between Laura Berg and her old former U.S. teammate Tyra Flowers, which would be interesting for the league. I think they can market that a little bit. But that is one to follow, obviously, with the West Coast Conference. To see that with BYU now in the Big 12, you lose that BYU-Loyola rivalry, but again, this year, as far as this year, Loyola should win that league, but I am interested to see how Loyola handles being the top team now, right? Because for how many years were they chasing BYU, right? They were the chaser. Now they're being chased. So that part is interesting, and we'll see if a team like Santa Clara maybe steps up to the plate or somebody else in the West Coast Conference. All right, let's talk about the Valley, which a few years ago was a multi-bid league and has, for many years. They have not been the last couple of years. What's your take on the Valley this year? Northern Iowa is the defending two-time regular season champion. Southern Illinois, Gensu won the automatic bid last year. It's a bigger league now in year 2. Your thoughts here? Can they get back to being a multi-bid league?
I don't know that I see them getting back to be a multi-bid league. Northern Iowa is another one of those teams that have had such great regular seasons, and maybe postseason wise, it gets a little iffier unintentionally. Um, I like the Valley and their top tier, and I like the progress I saw from the league last year. Northern Iowa obviously had a great regular season, lost some talent in the offseason, retained some talent in the offseason, so still a good club. You got Samantha Heyer, the ace pitcher. You've got Alexis Papillo, the slugger. Retain both of those. Those are both big deals. High power players. You mentioned Southern Illinois. They won the conference tournament. They were the 5 or 6 team in the regular season standings last year. That shows you how good the conference was last year, because SIU is never a scrub of a team, and to finish at that point in the regular season standings says something. I think of a Murray State of Belmont, now second year joining the league. I love watching Maya Johnson at Belmont, their pitcher. I think she's an X factor for Belmont, and Belmont could do something, make a little noise. Indiana State made progress. Illinois State, kind of always there. So I like the fact that the Valley has a depth of teams. I like the fact that teams in the conference made actual progress last year. And I think multiple teams in the conference retained a good chunk of talent. Jackie Liss with a great freshman year at Southern Illinois at shortstop. I mentioned Johnson from Belmont, Heyer and Papillo over at Northern Iowa. So I think there's talent spread across the league. So I don't think the Valley necessarily is in position to be a multi-bid league again. But similar to last year, if you tell me the team that finishes 5th or 6th in the conference race ends up winning the tournament, wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I think they're genuinely that deep with some quality teams.
You mentioned Jackie Liss. Is she now the new Sammy Bunch of the league, the face of the conference? Who's the Sammy Bunch of the Valley this year?
I think it's probably either Jackie Liss or Alexis Papillo at Northern Iowa. I think either one of them is in position to potentially do that. And it may come down to just who has a better year over year. But I think both are in pretty solid position to be that. I think a good year for one this year and a great year for the other maybe determines it. But I think both right now enter the season with the potential of being that Sammy Bunch kind of player, respected and known as the face of the league, so to speak.
Who's the best player that's not a pitcher in the mid-major? Maybe not necessarily the best hitter, but just the best all-around player that we're talking about. Kind of like Cindy McKinney was last year.
In the Valley or in mid majors?
Just in mid majors.
Ooh, I mean,
because I feel Liz has a chance to be in that conversation if she takes that next step based on what she's done already.
Yeah, Liz and Papillo both are in position to be that. I go back to a Kayla Ronson, who was an All-American last year at Boston.
Yeah.
Rachel Roop at Liberty probably is a sleeper in that role with a year that I think she can have this year. I mean, if you're talking best hitter, you go out to the Mountain West. You've got a couple. Like I think that is a much tougher question for me to answer than pitcher, and that's with pitcher having the Mullinses, the Canisius, the Myers, the Lackeys, and the even the Samantha Hires of the world. I think hitter is a little more of a wide open race. I mean, there's probably 10, 12 players that I could sit here and say, for this reason it could be such and such, for that reason it could be so and so. I don't know that there's necessarily one person that's an automatic in that spot. This time next year, maybe something different because somebody emerges. But I think there's a bunch of players that could probably make a case.
So these wide open. It's wide open.
I do. Yeah.
Addison Barnard, Wichita State would be my pick going in.
She would be on that list for me for sure. And if she does this year what she's done in the past several years, I think it probably is her crown.
Wasn't as healthy last year, talking to Christy Brenner, but which if you could be similar to what she was 2 years ago, even last year, it wasn't bad. That would probably be my pick. Maybe follows in that footsteps. But I do like Liss a lot from Southern Illinois. So that's an interesting race to see who kind of establishes themselves as some of the best players in the mid majors. Big story in realignment. Campbell had won the last 2 Big South Tournament Championships. They have moved on to the CAA, which I was under the impression was the Colonial Athletic Conference. You have told me, though, now that is not the case anymore. What? Explain.
It's the Coastal Athletic
What?
Association. Now, see, you're using logic. Just because like one school in the entire conference is actually on the coast, you can't think of it that way.
What?
You just got to be trendy here. Got to have some fun.
Listen, I'm just calling it what I've known always. It's the league formerly known as the Colonial Athletic Conference. That's what I'm calling it. I'm sorry because I'm still a little upset what they pulled off with JMU a couple of years ago. They banned them from the conference tournament. Go ahead.
It's not a conference. It's an association.
Oh, that's right. See, Colonial Athletic. Oh, geez. The league formerly known as the Colonial Athletic Association. Good lord.
Yes.
All right. So what is the impact of this Campbell move? Is this the biggest realignment move from a mid-major standpoint? I understand Charlotte and maybe those are the ones that are the higher profile and the bigger ones, but Campbell had won the last two bids out of the Big South. They now join the league formerly known as the Colonial Athletic Association, which Hofstra won the bid last year. You have Delaware, that is the regular season champion. Describe this impact of this Campbell move, both for the Big South and for the league formerly known as the Colonial Athletic Association.
I can tell you the impact of Campbell's move is not nearly as much as the impact of the number of times you keep saying the league formerly.
I know. I'm looking. I'm not going to get any press releases from the league anytime soon. I understand.
No, Campbell's move is huge. It's huge. It's probably right up there for me with those American moves. And for exactly the reason you said, you're talking about a twice defending conference champion leaving that conference. And don't get me wrong, don't at me. I understand softball doesn't make these moves, but we're talking softball here. So it's big for a twice defending conference champion to leave that league, go to another league, especially when they go to a league with an upper half like the CAA. Because if you think about that upper half of the CAA, UNC Wilmington, conference tournament champs 2 years ago. Hofstra, conference tournament champs last year. Delaware, regular season champs each of the last 2 years. Now Campbell joins that heap, and all of a sudden you've got a heck of a lot of trophies across a number of teams. You don't see stuff like that in a conference like the CAA very often. The American, sure. The Sun Belt, why not? Not in the CAA a whole lot. And that's what they have now. That upper tier is really solid there in the CAA. Campbell makes them even better. I think it's interesting. I think some people maybe think Campbell comes in, what do they look like? What does that look like? They make that conference better. I think they come in as a potential favorite to be champions.
Who benefits from Campbell's departure in the Big South?
Longwood and USC Upstate both do. I mean, USC Upstate's been a conference championship favorite forever, as long as Chris Hawkins has been there. Longwood has come on in more recent years, the last probably 5-6 years or so. I think both of them do.
Obviously, I've been joking a lot about the CAA, but I am curious. Delaware, is this their last year in the league, or they got one more after this year?
Got one more after this.
Before they go to CUSA. What is their status as far as the postseason is concerned at the conference tournament? Because I mentioned a couple of years ago, JMU was banned from the conference tournament when they made the move to the Sun Belt, which was a very controversial move. I did not like that move at all. Where are we with Delaware now that everybody knows they're going to CUSA? What is their status? I do wonder, in all seriousness, because this is a team that Jen Steele's won the regular season title. They are in the mix. You also have a team now like Hofstra and Adrian Clark. They won the bid last year. Can they repeat? They're going to host Larissa Anderson during the regular season, which I think is a fascinating storyline there to see Larissa back at Hofstra. So you've got Hofstra, you got Delaware. You've got Campbell in this league. You got the uncertainty with Delaware. Am I right? I mean, this is kind of an interesting league here. That can Delaware get over the hump? Can Hofstra, kind of build this control? Can Trina Prater win a conference title back-to-back in two different conferences? Which I'm trying to think, when was the last school to do that in softball, to go change conferences in win the leagues back to back. That's a stun. That's a stat for you D1 down the road maybe. But give me your just kind of your. I kind of went all over the place, but it is, as much as I make fun of the league right now for the name change and all, it is, and there are a lot of interesting storylines and questions.
There are, and it's a little bit of an all over the place league, to be honest, because you do have Campbell's new twice defending NCAA tournament team. Delaware regular season, haven't gotten it done in the postseason. Wilmington, Hofstra, even Towson. And to me, the best hitter in the conference is at Stony Brook, so throw them in there. So it really is a little bit of an all over the place league. But I think that's another thing about the CAA. If you look at some of the things they've done, there's been aspects of the CAA, like you mentioned, JMU, not postseason eligible. Think about back during COVID when it was they split into division. CAA's always got something interesting going on. This year, I thought the name change was going to be the interesting thing. Turns out it's actually on the softball field. But I do think it's a little bit of an all over the place league. I don't think that's unfair. And I think when you have an upper tier with 4 teams that have won championships in the span of 2 years, albeit Campbell's in another conference, that's huge for a league like the CAA. That's a big deal, and this is probably the deepest I've ever seen this league.
Yeah, we'll see what happens moving forward, especially with Delaware in the next couple of years in that league. So we'll see. That's going to be really, really fascinating with those 2 leagues. All right. So we're almost practically around the halfway point of all the leagues. Here's what we're going to do, folks, for the rest of these leagues. As you know, this year, one of the big stories, and Justin, we alluded to this in the live show season preview in the circle, and I talked to Amanda Scarborough about this at length, is obviously the new rule with the pitch clock, going from 25 seconds to 20 seconds. Now, I don't know how many people knew there was a 25-second clock because it wasn't really enforced a lot. So here's what I'm going to do. The following leagues I'm going to ask you here, Justin. I'm going to go with the old rule, 25 seconds. You got 25 seconds to tell us about this specific league that I will bring up. And then at some point down the road, I will say, okay, now we're going with the new 20-second clock for you to explain some of the other leagues. All right, so I'm gonna kind of let you settle in. 25 seconds. I'm gonna be very lenient, like all the umpires were in the 25-second clock. I won't mention any names, but then eventually I'm gonna go hard 20 seconds because supposedly everybody's gonna be really, really make that noise. I mean, I don't think I have a clock in front of me, unfortunately, like the stadiums do, but you'll just have to imagine it. So you've got 25 seconds to talk about. First, I will bring up the Atlantic 10.
St. Louis regular season champ last year. Really liked the growth from Loyola Chicago in their first year in the league. George Mason, tournament champions, lose Allie Rail after the season. She graduates. I think that takes Mason down a peg again. She was so huge, so clutch for them in the circle. Fordham, GW, both always there. But I was probably most impressed last year with Rail at Mason and Loyola Chicago as a whole. So I think this could be a really interesting year at the top of A10.
Very good. Under 25 seconds. By the way, are all these stadiums in the mid-major going to be able to have a clock? Like, how's that? Has everybody brought that up? Anyway, I'm not going to get into that.
I mean, $20 at Walmart maybe gets you home.
All right.
Making a suggestion.
Next, I'm sure they appreciate that. It'll go over really well. The America East.
UMBC loses Courtney Coppersmith. That's a huge deal. Kaya Matter is still there. Can she deliver to the level that Coppersmith did? I don't know that she can. We'll find out. Love Binghamton. Allie Richmond, Lindsay Walter. Think there's some real potential for Binghamton there. To me, it's a 2-horse race at the top.
The Horizon League.
Oakland change at head coach. Sydney Campbell's still there for a 5th year in the circle. As long as Sydney Campbell's there, Oakland's going to be favored, at least to finish in the top tier. Northern Kentucky won the tournament, made the NCAA tournament. Lauren Hicks there for them. She's a difference maker in the circle. So I think for me, that those 2 are ones that I'm going to watch there in the Horizon League.
The MAAC Conference, Miami of Ohio, the defending champions there. They've been dominating the league the last couple of years.
Probably still will. I mean, this is maybe the last year where the super core is still together. Not that that's going to change when this core leaves. I think it might, but right now they still have it together. Carly Spade, probably in that conversation for the best mid-major hitter that we've talked about. But I think it's there are some teams that can upset Miami. Ohio, Skip Miller, really solid. Akron building under Craig Nicholson. There are a few that I think can make some noise and maybe again pull off some wins over Miami and maybe make it interesting.
Get this game down pat. This is good. On the Northeast Conference.
Long Island, St. Francis, two that are interesting to me. St. Francis still has a huge core of talent, and I really like that. Long Island returned to the tournament. I think it was first time since 2016 as the NEC tournament champions. They went to the NCAA tournament. Lemoyne joins the conference, joins Division One, the only team moving up from D2 to D1 this year, and new. But I love the talent that St. Francis returns. I think of Rachel Marsden. There's some real talent on that St. Francis roster, so I think they have a shot to get back to the NCAA's this year.
I will use one of my timeout visits that, is only limited now to X amount, to only ask you this question, just what is the future of the Northeast Conference from a stability standpoint? You mentioned some of the new members this year. What's the future looking like? Because it feels like the last couple off seasons, I keep hearing about teams from the Northeast Conference either leaving or dropping sports.
Well, correct. You got Sacred Heart and Merrimack that are both leaving after this year. I believe they're going to the MAAC. It's an interesting place. Small schools, some private schools up there. Finances are always interesting. Outdoor sports are always interesting. Non-revenue sports are always interesting. I think it's not quite to the level of the West Coast Conference, but I think it's one worth keeping an eye on just because in the state of college athletics, we don't know. Like I said, I never say never. I think it's an interesting place, but they have added Lemoyne. You're looking at some potential realignment there. I think the Northeast Conference has a much better shot at potentially bringing up some D2s to Division One over time. So I think that could potentially be a savior for them. So I wouldn't call them dead in the water by any means. I think there's still some potential for that league to kind of regroup a little bit if they need it.
All right, very good. I go back to my wristband here for the next conference here, and then we get the clock reset. Another league that's had a bit of transition, the Ohio Valley Conference.
Yeah, SEMO, kind of the favorite for a few years running. Eastern Illinois pulls off the tournament championship last year, makes their first NCAA appearance. Olivia Price, really solid in the circle for EIU. Got a couple of transfers. I really like the Jaden Justman kid from Green Bay. Really solid for Green Bay there. I don't look past SEMO. I think SEMO's itching to get back. I even go back to the Oxford Regional in 2018-19. SEMO's been a good club for a while now. And so you never can count them out. I think they're ready to get back and scratch that itch again.
The SoCon.
UNC Greensboro's league to lose. Western Carolina lost their star in Bailey Honeycutt. Chattanooga's always a factor. Really like Samford again. I think Samford's got a shot at being something there. And you do have a Wofford team. Not that I think Wofford's going to immediately contend for a championship, but it's a Wofford team that's playing their first softball season this year. Very nice stadium, joins the SoCon. I do think that Wofford team, as a first-year club, has the potential to maybe pull off a few games here and there. But I do think it's UNC Greensboro's league to lose.
Southland Conference.
McNeese's league to lose. I think maybe the margin there is smaller than it has been. I don't think McNeese's. In saying that, this is the team that was 3 outs from upsetting Washington and Seattle Regional. But I do think the margin's a little smaller. Southeastern Louisiana has closed that gap very well the last several years. Nichols climbed well. But I think it's McNeese's conference to lose. Still have Ashley Vallejo in the circle. McNeese is still a very good club. So it's McNeese's conference to lose in the Southland, in my mind.
I'm going to tell the scoreboard operator to turn off the clock for a second here because I have a follow-up question. See, I'm just coming up with 3 theories that I think we're going to hear about. Like, hey, the clock wasn't working. It reset by accident. Can McNeese put that regional behind them? You mentioned it. They were 3 outs away from winning that Seattle regional. They were dominating Washington in that game. Big lead. Full disclosure, right? There were certain people in this interview here that was thinking of making plans because there could have a McNeese, Louisiana super regional. I'm gonna give you a hint. It wasn't me. I'm not the one with the Louisiana ties. and then the miracle happens with the Washington win. How does James Landreneau and McNeese put that behind them and not have that be a hangover to this year? Because that was as crushing of a loss as it gets for a program that who knows if they can get back that close to winning a regional.
It's going to be hard to completely get past that. And I think the biggest reason that it's going to be difficult to get past that completely, you had a huge lead. You had a lead that they were going to have to go through most of their lineup, and they're going to have to go through their entire lineup, and most of that lineup score just to match you. Like the dominance that you talk about for McNeese in that game, Washington looked silly. Washington looked silly for 6.5 innings. And I think that's what's going to be the most difficult for 6 innings. That's what's going to be the most difficult for McNeese to completely get past. They've been so close. They've been a team that's pulled off major upset wins. That's a factor that goes to these regionals. And, I think of the Evanston regional a couple of years ago when they beat Notre Dame, just shellacked Notre Dame. So this is not new territory for McNeese, but losing that way hurts. You don't forget that. Now, not forgetting it could fuel McNeese. It absolutely could, probably will. But it's going to be hard to completely put that regional out of their memory until they're able to finish the job in another one. And to your point, chances like that, I mean, they only come once a year at most, and they don't come every year. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be hanging over their heads this year by any means. I think they're probably in position to pull off another couple upset wins over some good teams, so that'll help. But I do think it's going to kind of be there in the back of some folks' mind for a while.
And they might be the team that's been looking forward to this season starting since June, right? Right? Like just let's get back to playing will probably be a factor. You bring up an interesting point. They've been traveling. They've been sent out outside of the state. Evanston, you mentioned a couple of years ago. Last year was Seattle. Boy, it feels like they're due to go back to LSU potentially, right? If LSU's hosting. I think, are they busable to Texas perhaps too, maybe? Baylor. That's the problem. You might get sent back to a familiar place, which, makes it a little tougher, but you never know.
Right.
We'll see. Landreneau knows what he's doing over there in company, so we'll see how they come out. But, man, talk about a what if, Justin. That's a 30 for 30 type. Because if McNeese gets those 3 outs, you're looking at a Louisiana hosting McNeese Supers with a trip to the World Series on the line.
Yeah.
I mean, that could have been Louisiana in the World Series, which would have made me look good because I picked them before this season. Not that I'm bitter about it or anything. Could have been McNeese, which would have been the biggest shocker maybe in the history of the sport to get to the World Series. Even bigger than JMU. From that standpoint. But instead, it's Washington makes that comeback, and they carry that momentum to the Supers and to the World Series. And now everybody's we're feeling good about this Washington team this year, where maybe we wouldn't have felt so good if they would have been knocked out in the region. It's kind of funny how drastic, how significant and impactful that finish was. But
yeah, matter of 1 inning.
Oh, man. All right. All right, that's good. Since I took so much time now, Justin, for the rest of the conferences that we have left, which I believe are 7 leagues, if my math is correct. Is that what you have? 7 leagues we got left here? Or no, 6 leagues. Excuse me. Thank you. 6 leagues. So for these following 6 leagues, you will have 20 seconds. We're gonna put the new rule in, which includes the illegal pitch. You cannot put your foot on the floor. There, that's another story. But you got 20 seconds for the remaining 6, for the next 6 leagues, starting with the Big Sky.
Well, I think going into last year, everybody expected Weber State to be superb, and instead they were the exact opposite. Idaho State wins the regular season, kind of comes out of nowhere, seemingly. Andrew Rich is coach of the year. Northern Colorado wins the conference tournament. Mary Kay Amicone, this is her last year's head coach at Weber State. How big of a difference does that make for Weber wanting to win one last one for her type of deal? It's a conference I like. Small conference, 6 teams. Lot of former champions, a lot of teams with a couple of trophies in their closet. Really interesting league. Again, parity.
Boy, that was close. I almost gave you a violation there. We'll see. Big, we mentioned the Big South, I believe, earlier there, with the departure of Campbell. So actually, that was good. We got the Ivy League now. How do you see the Ivy League? Harvard, a new era in Harvard softball. I know is one of the headliners there.
It is. And Jenny Roan taking over for Jenny Allard, now the head coach. Allard, now the head coach at Pitt. Roan's familiar with Harvard. She's familiar with the Harvard way, but just with also with the culture. With Harvard's used to winning. To me, I mean, I like Harvard. I like Princeton. Princeton did lose Serena Starks, reigning player of the year. Lost Alexis Laudenslager. If they can replace those, I could see Princeton making another run. They're a solid club.
The MAAC with two A's, my boy Joe Osanio getting Marist to the NCAA tournament last year, former Yankee reliever, side wrestler back in the day. Can he make it back-to-back there in the MAAC with two A's?
I think he's got a shot at it. I mean, Marist is one of those teams. There's probably 3 or 4 teams in the MAAC that, kind of in that top heat, kind of always in contention. Marist is one of them. So, yeah, I think he can. You got Canisius changing on the coaching staff the first time in something close to a decade. But still, that's a consistent club too. But Marist has a shot at it. And, how many former Yankee relievers are head softball coaches?
You tell me. I know Joe. I'm due to have him back on the pod.
I don't think Mel Stoudemire's taking over. John Wetland. Maybe John Wetland can be a college softball coach at some point.
Hey, man, former Don Slott was on the UCLA staff for a number of years. You know what I'm saying?
It's true. Doug Mirabelli was on the Florida staff one year.
Mirabelli, yeah.
Nobody knows who Doug Mirabelli is. That's why I threw him out there.
I do. MEAC conference.
NC Central's the defending champions. MEAC got a little weaker when you lost FAMU and Bethune-Cookman a couple of years ago. You've seen several different teams cycle through championship-wise. Morgan State, Norfolk State, Howard, now NC Central. That's something I like in that conference. It's they play the games. Like, that's why you play the games. And, you think about it, NC Central's just the latest. Could be a repeat this year. Could be one of those teams that's used to winning. I'm going to go back to my favorite word, parity, again.
And then lastly, the SWAC.
Well, that's where Bethune-Cookman and Florida A&M went when they left the MEAC. I think the SWAC will continue to still be dominated, especially by teams from Texas Southern, Prairie View A&M. I think Southern could be a little more of a factor this year. I think Bethune and FAMU will still make some noise, kind of like they always do. But I think those teams from Texas Southern, Prairie View A&M, maybe a little Alabama State in there, are probably the top teams, probably the teams to beat.
Shout out Todd Bradley there of Alabama State there. Did I do it? Did we cover all 27 leagues, Justin?
I believe we did, sir, by my count at least.
For those that don't know, usually I forget 1 or 2 leagues, and Justin message reminds me like, "Hey, did you not want to talk about this league?" Like, "Oh, you're right. Good call." So I think
everybody feels included this year. Nobody feels unspecial.
Well, somebody always feels somebody. So let me finish with this. I'm going to give you an over-under of at-large bids to non-Power 5 teams. Last year, I believe there was 5 teams that made that. The year before was only 2. They've averaged around 4.5 since 2019, give and take. I'm going to put the over-under, Justin, 3.5 bids. Over-under 3.5 bids for mid-major teams to make the NCAA tournament. Are you going over 3.5, under 3.5 this year? How many teams do we get from non-Power 5 leagues, if you call, or I call them the mainstream 5? But of those 27 leagues we just talked about, how many bids do they get? Is it over or under 3.5?
Ooh, I know my heart wants to say one thing. My heart wants to go one direction. I think my brain's got to go the other, and I'm going to say under.
Oh,
I'm thinking maybe 3. I don't think mid-majors, I don't think non-Power 5s will get 5 again. I think 4 is probably the cap. I'm going to say 3. I think maybe the linchpin is if a Mountain West can sneak in, if a Summit League can sneak in. I do think the American is a potential 3-bid league, so that's 2 at-larges there. Sunbelt could throw one in to get to that 3. But if a Boise State, San Diego State's a real battle, if a South Dakota State does what I think they can, UCA did last year, that's what I think maybe you get to 4. But I'm going to say under. I'm going to go 3 and hope I'm wrong and there's more.
So we agree the American and the Sun Belt probably the front runners for a multi-bid league. Would you
Agreed.
say
Yes.
we agree with that? I think you're right. A lot depends on does the American get 2 or do they get 3 bids, or more,
Agreed.
whatever. Sun Belt, does the Sun Belt get 2 or 3? It wasn't too far long ago they had a 3-bid year. So
At 4.
four bids. You're right. I don't know if they'll get to that point again, but I think 2 or 3. That could play a factor. You have the Mountain West situation with the conference tournament. What if a San Diego State has a great regular season, but Boise kind of returns the favor and wins the tournament, still gets the automatic bid? Could that be a 2-bid league now all of a sudden?
Right.
Does somebody upset Liberty in this USA tournament in Las Cruces, New Mexico? That could be an interesting plot line. You mentioned, obviously, the Summit if South Dakota State has a big regular season. Big West did it last year with 2 bids. I'm going to go over, Justin. I'm going over. I'm wearing American, by the way, gear in honor of, the mid-majors because I covered the league for many. There still will. Shout out to Morgan Uber and company over there in the league. But I'm going to go over 3.5. I think the American has a shot at 3 bids. But I think the Sun Belt can. I think the Sun Belt's a 2-bid league at a minimum. I think there, and I think either the Mountain West could be a 2-bid league. I would not be surprised if that happened. Or maybe the A-Sun surprises us. They were a 2-bid league last year. Maybe we get surprised. Maybe Central Arkansas reloads instead of rebounds, and then you get another team that's surprised. And that's the thing. The conference tournament, as we saw last year, one of the things that helped the mid-majors last year, Middle Tennessee stole a bid by winning that CUSA tournament. You were there in person, but Charlotte got to keep they got in as an at-large as a result. Fullerton didn't win the league. Long Beach did. Fullerton got the at-large. So that's what helps a lot of times more of the mid-major is does the committee keep them in? I'm going to say over. I'm with you. I think 4 is a good I think 4 is probably the right number. I think 5, you're asking for maybe an upset or 2 in the conference tournament. I think 4 is a good number, but I think they need the American and the Sun Belt to lead the way. If one of those 2 leagues disappoints, if we're having a conversation in 3 months and like, what? The American was a 1-bid league? That's a bad sign. But I don't think that'll happen. But you never know in this sport.
You never know. Somebody always takes us by surprise one way or another.
True. Very true. And we'll see. We'll see what happens with that on there. All right, so and give me your final thoughts here as we wrap up this preview here with the mid-majors and what people can look for before I get to talk about D1. But give me your final thoughts here of what you're looking forward to seeing this year from the mid-majors.
Love the American Conference. I think there's a lot of teams there. I think general softball fans, maybe that don't have a team in the American, should still pay attention to the American, watch some of those teams play. Some really good softball in the American. I think there's potential for a JMU type run this year, for a UCA type run this year. I mentioned earlier Grand Canyon, South Dakota State are a couple on those lists for me. So I think there are some good mid-majors that maybe aren't those names that we saw in the at-large bids last year. I think there's some outliers, maybe even some automatic bids that are still that quality. So those are probably my headliners. Watch the American. And if Grand Canyon or South Dakota State's really good this year, you heard it here first.
And the hot head coach name that will come out this year after the mid-majors that people will be talking about in the offseason for either openings or whatever, who is that?
It could be Shannon Hayes at Grand Canyon. If they do what I think they're able to do, it could be Shannon Hayes. He's coached in the Power 5 before. He's worked his way back now. He's coached at D2. Now he's at Grand Canyon. It could be Shannon Hayes. He's one that I think I would keep an eye on. And then, half the coaches in the American maybe fit the same bill.
Yeah, right. Chastain, Charlotte, Jordan Clark. If FAU gets back to the tournament, they haven't been to the tournament since 2016. Rodney DeLong. That makes sense. It seems like the American's always the hot name list when it comes to other sports, so why not just softball as well? I mentioned Ashley Waters earlier, Boston. Yep. I think there's some names. And I think it's important for fans to know those names because before you know it, maybe, who knows, some of these coaches may end up coaching your favorite team in a big conference down the road. All right, Justin, Tell us a little bit about D1 softball now. You're part of D1 softball. You're part of this great team with Rand Podkey, Graham Hayes. You and Graham Hayes. That's like a dream team type of deal. That's like LeBron James, Dwayne Wade back in Miami days. There with the Heatles. There. Give me a little bit of what people can expect on D1 softball.
The same thing you're used to getting from D1 in terms of great coverage of everybody. We've wrapped our conference previews already, but we did so many different mid-major leagues, all the Power Fives, made sure we get as much as we can in, a little bit of everybody if we can. I've never personally been on a writing team like the one I'm on now. I'm pretty happy to be at the helm of this team. Graham Hayes, you mentioned Rhiannon Potke, two of the best writers, and I love their feature writing. So I don't want to pigeonhole them into feature as only feature writers, but I love their feature writing. So I'm really excited to be on this team. Shelly Carlin and I both joining with D1. I think it's been a lot of fun already. The content we've put out, just the conversations that we've had have been so much fun. But the same kind of content you're used to getting from D1 in the sense of wall to wall, cutting edge coverage, a little bit of everybody, all the good stuff, and plenty of good quality content. Like the thing about D1, you're gonna get good quality content every day. Every article, you know what you're getting. That bar, it was set pretty high, it's been set pretty high, and it's gonna stay pretty high. And I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's gonna be awesome. We have had Pocky on many a times too on In the Circle here, and that you guys gonna have bracketology there. We're gonna have a bracketologist.
Yeah, do you know a good bracketologist that we might be able to wrangle?
I'm checking my number. I might have somebody.
Yeah, that would be helpful if you can get back to me on that. Yeah.
Yes, I could. I think I have a feeling I could do that for you.
Okay.
That is Justin McLeod, D1 softball. Make sure you follow him. Make sure where can they follow you? They can follow you at D1 softball. And where's the other personal handle?
Just facts, ma'am, on Twitter, because that's what you're always gonna get from me. Just the facts. Just facts, ma'am, on Twitter, and yeah, D1 softballs on all the socials, D1softball.com, all that good stuff.
All right, Justin, enjoy it. Always a pleasure to do this. Our fourth annual season preview there, talking mid-majors. Thanks for always taking the time. I'll see you in Florida. I know you'll be covering a lot of events in Florida. I'll be there with you. I'll run into you there. And until then, sir, enjoyed it as always.
Always appreciate you. It's always fun.